You are listening to the Objects of Affection collection. Study 23, Value Beyond Price, David Graeber and the Political Economy of Post-Luxury Objects. The global luxury market, for decades a bastion of seemingly inexhaustible growth and cultural authority, has entered a period of profound crisis. This is not merely a cyclical downturn, but a structural exhaustion, a moment of reckoning in which the foundational logic of luxury value is being called into question. The symptoms are both quantitative and qualitative, pointing toward a system that has, in its relentless pursuit of scale, hollowed out the very sources of its desirability. To understand the emergence of a new paradigm, post-luxury conceptual functional art, one must first diagnose the advanced state of decay in the old. The quantitative slowdown beneath the quantitative data lies a more profound qualitative crisis, a phenomenon aptly termed luxury fatigue, which is symptomatic of a broader cultural state of exhaustion. This is a growing weariness among consumers, both wealthy and aspirational, with the omnipresence and homogeneity of prestige brands. The crisis stems from a fundamental contradiction: the industrial-scale production and distribution of objects whose value is predicated on rarity and exclusivity. This paradox is fueled by three primary factors. Hyperavailability. The economic model of major luxury houses has shifted from preserving exclusivity to maximizing volume. With flagship stores in every major city and ubiquitous online availability, brands have become commonplace, a direct contradiction of luxury's core promise of inaccessibility. Aesthetic standardization. Social media has accelerated the dissemination of trends, leading to a visual homogeneity across collections. Discerning consumers recognize cross-cutting themes, from oversized logos to seasonal color palettes, creating a déjà vu effect that diminishes any perception of uniqueness. The rise of dupes. Proliferation of high-quality replicas raises a critical question. If the appearance is identical, why pay the luxury price? This phenomenon reveals the extent to which brands have overinvested in visual codes, what semioticians call sign value, at the expense of substantive quality, craftsmanship, or narrative. The traditional luxury object has been defined not by its utility, its use value, but by its sign value, its capacity to signify wealth, status, and taste through a logo or recognizable design. Luxury in this framework is a specific kind of sign value, produced in specific narratives and used in processes of stratification. However, when the sign becomes hyper-available and its aesthetic codes are standardized and easily copied, its ability to signify distinction collapses. The result is a weakened value proposition. Consumers are no longer convinced that the price tag corresponds to a believable narrative of rarity or superior craftsmanship, leading to a widespread sentiment that luxury goods are simply overpriced, a crisis perfectly captured by the Miu Miu problem. The sign, detached from any tangible substance, has become an empty signifier. This dynamic is not merely a shift in consumer preference but a structural response to the object's loss of meaning. The documented pivot in consumer spending from luxury goods toward luxury experiences, such as travel, wellness, and fine dining, is a search for the very qualities the modern commodity has lost: authenticity, personal narrative, and inalienability. An experience, unlike a mass-produced handbag, is inherently unique to the individual. It cannot be easily replicated, exchanged, or commodified in the same way. It represents an unconscious attempt to reclaim a form of value that resists the logic of the market. Parallel crisis. The speculative art market's narrative breakdown, a powerful parallel to the crisis in luxury, can be found in the contemporary art market. For decades, this market has functioned as a myth-making machine, selling not just artworks but stories, symbols, and projections. Its value system is built on a form of collective belief and speculative frenzy, where prices often have little connection to the intrinsic qualities of the work itself. This system, like luxury, is now showing signs of exhaustion, with slowing auctions and gallery closures. Crucially, this collapse is being diagnosed not merely in economic terms, but as a narrative breakdown. The story that once gave value its meaning has been lost. The market has come to mirror the very speculative logic it once claimed to critique, leading to a situation where prices rose, but meaning declined. A phenomenon seen in the market reception of artists like Jade Fadajutami. When price no longer represents quality and numbers lose their narrative content, the market becomes a language without syntax, and the collective faith that underpins it evaporates. This parallel is instructive. It reveals that the crisis facing luxury is not unique, but is symptomatic of a broader logic in late-stage capitalism. the creation of value systems so detached from tangible human action, labor, and meaning that they are inherently unstable and prone to collapsing into a crisis of belief. The exhaustion of the luxury market is the exhaustion of a particular way of making meaning. The fundamental opposition between this exhausted traditional system and the emerging post-luxury conceptual functional art alternative can be understood across several key axes. Where the traditional luxury system's primary value driver is sign value, the status conveyed by brand and price, the post-luxury conceptual functional art system locates value in narrative, including the object's story, ethical provenance, and craft. This distinction informs their underlying economic logics. Traditional luxury operates on the principle of commodity exchange, where objects are defined by their alienability and market price. In contrast, the post-luxury conceptual functional art system aligns with a gift logic, treating objects as inalienable possessions whose value is tied to relationships and history. This divergence extends to the relationship with the object itself. The traditional model promotes consumption and ownership, treating the object as a possession to be acquired. The post-luxury conceptual functional art model reframes this relationship as one of stewardship and custodianship, where the owner is a temporary guardian of the object's story. Consequently, their temporalities are opposed. Traditional luxury is trend-driven and disposable, designed for obsolescence, while post-luxury conceptual functional art objects are created for permanence, intended to be transgenerational. Finally, the source of meaning in each system is distinct. For traditional luxury, meaning is externally validated by the market. For post-luxury conceptual functional art, meaning is generated internally, through personal and social connection to the object. The anthropological foundation. David Graeber's social theory of value to construct a viable alternative to the exhausted luxury paradigm, a more robust theory of value is required. One that moves beyond the narrow confines of neoclassical economics. The work of the late anthropologist David Graeber provides precisely such a framework. His synthesis of anthropological, economic, and political thought offers a powerful lens through which to understand how value is socially created, maintained, and ultimately contested. Value as meaningful action. Graeber's central thesis is a radical departure from conventional economic thought. He argues that value is not an intrinsic property of an object, nor is it simply a reflection of subjective desire, determined by supply and demand. Instead, value is fundamentally social. Graeber proposes a synthetic definition. Value is the way people represent the importance of their own actions to themselves. It is the proportion of a society's total creative energy invested in producing and maintaining something, whether that something is a physical object, a social institution, or a moral principle. In this view, value is meaning created in action. When we deem something valuable, we are making a social judgment about the importance of the human efforts that brought it into being and sustain its existence. This framework integrates what are often treated as three separate domains of value: the economic market price, the sociological or moral, what is good or desirable, and the linguistic value as meaningful difference, as in Saussurian linguistics. Graeber contends that these are not distinct concepts but different facets of a single underlying system of meaning-making through which human societies define what is worthwhile. The value vs. values distinction. A critical element of Graeber's analysis is his deconstruction of the modern separation between economic value and moral values. The fact that the same word is used to describe the market price of a commodity and what is considered ultimately important in life is not a coincidence. It points to a hidden level where both come down to the same thing. He argues that this conceptual split is a historical artifact of capitalism and the commodification of labor. In pre-capitalist or non-market societies, these two senses of value are often inseparable. In a market society, however, a sharp line is drawn. Money becomes the universal medium for expressing value in the economic sense, creating a clear frontier between what has been commodified and what remains outside that relationship. Values, concepts like love, honor, or justice, are defined precisely by the fact that they ought not to have a price attached. This division allows market logic to operate in its own sphere, seemingly detached from moral considerations. The hollowness of the traditional luxury market, as chronicled by critics like Dana Thomas, can be understood as a direct consequence of this schism. It is a system that relentlessly maximizes economic value, price, while systematically evacuating the object of the moral values, craft, integrity, human connection, that might make it truly meaningful. Critique of market fetishism, building on the intellectual traditions of Karl Marx and Marcel Mauss, Graeber offers a potent critique of how market systems obscure the social origins of value. In a market economy, the products of human labor confront their producers as alienable commodities. The price of these commodities appears to be an objective property of the things themselves, determined by the impersonal forces of the market. This is the essence of what Marx termed commodity fetishism. Graeber extends this analysis, arguing that money and commodities act as a kind of symbolic system through which the importance of our own collective actions is reflected back at us, but in a distorted, alienated form. The object itself, the diamond, the handbag, the work of art, seems to be the source of the very value that human action and desire created. This creates a fundamental disconnect between the intention and labor of the maker, the social relationships involved in production, and the object's final price. The market erases the history of the object, presenting it as a pure, abstract commodity ready for exchange. This anthropological understanding of value is not a neutral academic observation. It is an inherently political one. If value is the social representation of the importance of human actions, then any struggle over what a society deems valuable is necessarily a political struggle over which kinds of human actions and which forms of human creativity are considered important. The proposal of a new system of value, such as that embodied by post-luxury conceptual functional art, is therefore not merely an aesthetic or commercial project. It is a political act that asserts the importance of certain actions, artisanal craft, ethical sourcing, long-term stewardship over others, such as marketing, speculation, and mass production. It is an attempt to reclaim value from the abstract logic of the market and reground it in tangible, meaningful human practice. Graeber as the definitive framework for post-luxury conceptual functional art. Post-luxury conceptual functional art. The contemporary luxury market is in a state of quiet rebellion. Consumers are experiencing a palpable price fatigue, a growing disillusionment with a system where brand status has become radically decoupled from substantive worth. This is more than a market correction. It is a crisis of meaning, a rejection of objects whose value is derived from the abstract logic of marketing and speculation, rather than from tangible human qualities of craft, narrative, and purpose. In this moment of systemic exhaustion, a new paradigm is emerging. Post-luxury conceptual functional art. Post-luxury conceptual functional art. This movement represents a deliberate turn toward meaningful objects designed with both function and philosophy at their core. Yet, to fully grasp the significance of this shift, a theoretical framework is needed that can move beyond the limited vocabulary of economics and marketing. The work of the late anthropologist David Graeber, a pivotal thinker on the social creation of value, provides this essential framework. His theories offer not just a critique of the market's failings, but a coherent, anthropological language for understanding and validating the principles of post-luxury. This article argues a central thesis. David Graeber's work on value provides the indispensable anthropological key to deconstructing the arbitrary logic of the traditional luxury market, and in turn, for establishing the principles of post-luxury conceptual functional art as a meaningful and sustainable alternative. By applying Graeber's lens, one can see that post-luxury conceptual functional art is not merely a new aesthetic trend, but a profound effort to re-embed our relationship with objects in a logic of meaning, not a logic of the market. Deconstructing the myth of market value. The foundational myth of the modern market is that value is an objective, intrinsic quality of a thing, discovered by the impersonal forces of supply and demand. David Graeber's work systematically dismantles this premise. Drawing on a deep history of anthropological thought, he argues that value is never inherent. It is always the product of human actions, beliefs, and social relationships. Value, in his formulation, is the social recognition of meaningful human effort. What a society values is a reflection of what it collectively considers to be a worthy investment of its creative energies. The contemporary luxury market operates by systematically obscuring this fact. It creates a fundamental disconnect between the labor and intention of an object's creator and its final price. The value of a luxury handbag is determined less by the hours of skilled labor involved and more by the millions spent on advertising campaigns, celebrity endorsements, and the maintenance of an aura of exclusivity. This creates a system of fetishism, where the brand logo, the sign, appears to be the magical source of value, erasing the human hands and social histories behind the object. This dynamic finds its most extreme expression in the speculative contemporary art market, a useful parallel for understanding luxury's own narrative breakdown. In the art world, the disconnect between price and the material reality of the object is overt. An artwork's multi-million-dollar valuation is sustained not by the cost of canvas and paint, but by a complex and often opaque web of gallery representation, curatorial validation, auction house hype, and the collective belief of elite collectors. The value is almost entirely narrative and speculative. When that narrative falters, when the story that justifies the price is no longer believable, the value can collapse because it was never grounded in the tangible reality of the object's creation. The luxury market, while less extreme, operates on a similar principle of manufactured belief. Post-luxury conceptual functional art emerges as a direct response to this system of arbitrary valuation. It seeks to close the gap between price and meaning, to make the social creation of value transparent and legible once more. From commodity to totem, Graeber and the inalienable object, the most critical application of Graeber's thought to the post-luxury paradigm lies in the anthropological distinction between a commodity and a gift, or what can be termed an inalienable possession. This distinction provides the core theoretical engine for understanding the value of a post-luxury conceptual functional art object. In anthropological terms, a commodity is an object defined by its alienability. It is severed from the identity of its producer and its own unique history. Its value lies in its exchangeability for other commodities, typically mediated by money. A mass-produced watch is a perfect commodity. Each unit is identical, and its purchase is an impersonal transaction that creates no lasting social bond between buyer and maker. The object is a passive thing, defined by its market price. A gift or an inalienable possession operates on a contrary logic. Its value derives from its inalienability, its deep entanglement with the identities, histories, and social relationships of people. Classic examples from anthropology include heirloom necklaces or sacred artifacts that are so intertwined with a clan's identity that to sell them would be a diminishment of the self. These objects are not passive things, they are active agents in social life, imbued with the spirit of their givers and their pasts. They are personified. As the analysis of gift economies shows, they tend to assume the social forms of persons, whereas commodity economies tend to treat persons like things. The remainder of this study continues at objectsofaffectioncollection.com. This has been a study from the Objects of Affection Collection, a critical art research institution operating under the framework of post-luxury conceptual functional art. Read the full research at objectsofaffectioncollection.com.